I would like to welcome everyone to a chef's journey through Alexander Valley. And this is the Chardonnay episode. We have a lot of really wonderful panelists today that Steve is going to introduce, and I'll give Steve his introduction and let him take it away. So Steve is our incredible guest moderator for the day. He was born and raised in the Bronx, and he received his Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy from Clark University. Additionally, he received his master's degree in educational technology from San Francisco State University. After 3 years of working in the corporate world, he realized that he yearned for something more creative and fulfilling. Steve pondered his twin passions of writing and wine, and he contemplated how we can combine those two interests. Taking a major leap of faith, Steve set out to become a wine writer. He went on to become a writer for many years at the Wine Spectator before moving on as the West Coast editor of the Wine Enthusiast. He later became the director of wine communications and education at Jackson Family Wines. Steve is the author of numerous books, both fiction and nonfiction. And in the wine world, he has written A Wine Journey Along the Russian River, as well as New Classic Winemakers of California, Conversations with Steve Heimoff. He lives and works in Oakland with his dog, Gus. So without further ado, I will let Steve take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa Marie, for that wonderful introduction. Welcome to a chef's journey through Alexander Valley. And as Lisa Marie said, my name is Steve Heimoff. I'm your moderator. And today we're going to be focusing on Chardonnay and on single thread restaurant. And we'll also be talking about the Chardonnays of two wonderful wineries, Robert Young Estate Vineyard and Hafner Vineyards. If there's a theme, I think, that's going to emerge through all this, it's going to be beyond Alexander Valley, family. We'll find out a lot more about that later. So before we jump into this thing, let's go through all the squares on your Zoom screen and give a shout out to, in no particular order, Mr. Robert Young. You want to give a wave?
Hi, everybody.
Or we call him Robbie because he's young Robert. Jim Young.
There we go.
Matt Michael, winemaker at Robert Young. Park Hafner.
Howdy.
His daughter, Kate Hafner.
Hi.
And did I forget anyone?
The chef.
And Chef. Oh my God. Chef.
I thought this was my journey.
You're going to be the main part of this whole thing. So having said that, down at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A logo for question and answer. And if you click that on, you will be able to ask questions in the square that opens up on your screen. And we will get to as many of your questions as we possibly can. And finally, before we start, if you're going to be tasting along with us, I would encourage you to open your bottles now and get everything ready so you don't have to bother with that later, okay? So I think we're going to start with Chef Kyle Connaughton, okay? Chef Kyle from Single Thread Restaurant and his wife Katrina opened Single Thread Farm, Restaurant, and Inn in Healdsburg in December 2016. The restaurant received a perfect 4 stars from the San Francisco Chronicle only 4 months later, and in 2018 was awarded 2 stars in the fabled Michelin Red Guide. The next year, the restaurant was given its 3rd Michelin star. Single Thread's other honors and awards are far too numerous to mention. Chef Kyle began his culinary career in Los Angeles with an apprenticeship at one of the oldest Japanese restaurants in the city. He continued his training at Spago Beverly Hills, the dining room at the Ritz-Carlton, Hama Sushi, AOC Wine Bar and Restaurant, and others. This was followed by several years cooking in Japan at famed chef Michel Bras, and in numerous traditional Japanese cuisine restaurants. Single Thread's philosophy is based on the Japanese concept of omotenashi, or anticipating a guest's every need. The restaurant focuses on agricultural seasonality. It offers a tasting menu that the Financial Times says, quote, could not be more impressive. Chef and Katrina also partner with the nonprofit charity Sonoma County Meal to provide food for people in need in these very difficult times, including first responders and those in shelters. Single Thread Farm grows its own vegetables, fruit, herbs, flowers, honey, eggs, and olive oil. And Chef, I think I'd like to start by asking you, what inspired you and Katrina to embark on such a huge, ambitious undertaking, not just the restaurant, but the farm, the restaurant, and the inn?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. And we love this area so much, and I love the the theme, the chef's journey through the Alexander Valley, because it is my journey every day in the Alexander Valley. Because our farm, my wife's farm, is also in the Alexander Valley. We farm 5 acres in the Alexander Valley, not too far from these two amazing wineries that we love so much. So we are here, and the reason why we came to Healdsburg and this this amazing corner of the world that is North Sonoma County, really after a long dream of falling in love with this place when Katina and I were 23 years old, and we got married on the Mendocino coast, and we were treating ourselves to dinner the next night at Berkeley, at Chez Panisse in Berkeley, as kind of a wedding gift to ourselves. And we were driving through and actually got off in Healdsburg on the way to have lunch. And this is before the internet and Yelp reviews or anything. And we pulled into town and we just fell in love with it. And we said, this is it, this is the place. Almost 17 years later, we opened a restaurant 1 block away from where we first said that. And, it's been a culmination of a few decades of work between my wife and I. We've been together since we were 15 years old. So we've been on this journey together. My wife as a farmer and myself as a chef, and she was farming in Japan and then farming in the UK when we lived 5 years outside of London. And then, coming back to Sonoma County to start building Single Thread. And, we've been kind of cooking and farming together at different parts of the world and getting in preparation for opening Single Thread. So, we came here because we were so inspired by the agricultural community, certainly by the wine, and it was the wine that spoke to us, from this area, and just the kind of the biodiversity that's here between organic farming, winemaking, dairies, different artisans that are here, in Sonoma County that are doing amazing things, and just kind of like a spirit of kind of hospitality that runs through the veins of everyone who's here and really passionate about what they do. And so, we moved to Japan for many years. We moved to Europe, but it was always about getting here, getting to the Alexander Valley, getting to Healdsburg, so that we could then plant our own roots and begin, to grow. And really, what we do at the restaurant every day is we do an 11-course menu, but it's nothing that guests, choose. They're not ordering things. We get information from them in advance about their dietary restrictions, allergies, aversions, anything like that. And we kind of get that out of the way, and then we cook for them. And that's what the daily harvest is. And it's not just a kind of about a sense of place. It's about a sense of time within that place. So any day that you're coming to Single Thread, it's really about what we're harvesting on that day, in that moment. It's about experiencing the best of Sonoma County right there in that moment, through the food, the ingredients, the menu, the flowers, and all of the floral, because my wife grows all of her own floral as well, and certainly through the wines to give guests, whether they're locals or they're visitors, a real sense of what this part of Sonoma County is all about and what makes it so special special. Certainly, you're all going to taste that in your glasses, today. Two amazing Chardonnays. Of course, Alexander Valley, very, very famous for their Cabernet Sauvignon, but also, equally, strong in its Chardonnay. And, we really cook to these wines as well. So, the expression of the terroir of what we grow here on our farm and the other farms around us is combined as well as is cooking to the wines that we have here, and really kind of being inspired by the wines, particularly from this region, and formulating a menu each night that really allows guests to have not only the exploration of the menu and all of the ingredients certainly, but hand in hand along with the wines on that same journey.
The wine list is incredible. It's really just a delight to go through it if you're a wine person, and I know we all are. But tell me this: since you're so seasonal, give us an example of how your menu might change from winter to summer. In the winter time, for instance, do you gravitate more toward root vegetables?
Yeah, sure. I think we look at the traditional, sort of winter vegetables and summer vegetables. Certainly, one of the things that we're so fortunate to have here in Sonoma County is the ability to grow year round. So, we certainly have seasons, and they're distinct seasons. But at the same time, we're able to grow, all year round. So my wife's planning and her succession planning just means that we're constantly kind of seeing new things and having new vegetables and new inspiration. And it's a constant conversation between myself and my wife and her farm team and the culinary team about what we're growing, what's coming. And so there's always something new, there's always something exciting, there's always something to be inspired by. And we're constantly changing dishes and evolving the menu. So every time you come, there aren't any signature dishes. Really, it's always just sort of like an evolution of the cuisine, based around the produce and on the season. And even though we, of course, serve seafood and we serve some, locally raised meats as well, it's really what the driving force is really about the vegetables. And we talk, normally about seasons being, winter, spring, summer, and fall, but, looking through the eyes of a farmer, and certainly looking through the eyes of, of a winemaker, as well, we know that the seasons are much, smaller incrementally to us. So we actually use a really old-fashioned sort of Japanese system for following the seasons more through the agricultural lens, which is actually to break the year down into 72 5-day seasons. Wow. So, we can say that, asparagus and peas are in season in spring, but, spring's, starting on March 21st, and there aren't any asparagus or peas yet. And it's ending in June when it's very much, summer here. Mm-hmm. So we're really looking for vegetables to capture them on their peak. So when we're talking about the seasonality internally, we're looking at the much, much smaller increments of time. So, when we plan something, we're sort of planning it in 5-day increments. And for us, each one of those 5-day increments, those changes are happening constantly, even if we're not really aware of them. When you see it through the farmer's eyes, you really see, how much that the land and the products are constantly changing within the seasons.
You mentioned the Japanese cycle of 72 5-day periods.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about omotenashi, because that covers a lot of territory where you're anticipating the guests' every needs. What does that mean?
Yeah, omotenashi, when you read the characters when it's written, actually has two meanings. So one, it means to have nothing in your hand, which means that you have an open hand to your guests, which means the meaning is that your intentions are known. You don't have some other ulterior motive for taking care of your guest other than to take care of them and to provide for them and to nourish them and to anticipate them and make sure that we're taking care of whatever their needs are, whether it's an allergy or just a preference or whatever it is. And then the other meaning is the other reading of the characters is to not turn your back. So that means that it's in Japan, someone will enter the room facing you and they will exit the room facing you when you're in a hospitality environment. So you never literally turning your back on the guests, but it also means that, you know, that you are there, you're there for them, and you are there for their experience and their needs. And we really wanted to create an experience that wasn't about coming to some temple of cuisine, but, you know, really coming to a place within a really special place that sort of embodies the spirit and the hospitality of Sonoma County, and is really about, you know, taking care of our guests. So they're putting their trust in us in the menu, and saying that we're going to just cook for them, and they're not going to choose anything from a menu. We're getting information from them that we need to know to be able to do that in a way that they can enjoy, best enjoy. And then we tailor that experience to each guest individually, however much we need to do that. And so that when they come, they can just relax and enjoy. So, you know, we are not here to impose onto them or to say, you know, you're here to experience our cuisine. You know, the spirit of a Motenashi is to say, you're here to celebrate and experience yourselves, and the dynamics of the table and who you choose to get around the table with, you know, with food and wine together, and relax and decompress and, you know, enjoy those, you know, 3 or 4 hours. And we're there to set the scene for that through the food, through the wine, through the ambience, through everything that we do. We're really there to take care of the guest experience, not for them to be there for us.
So Chef, we'll get to the dishes in a little bit later, but let me just ask you some really quick questions.
Sure.
Do you typically get out on the floor when the restaurant's open?
Yeah, well, actually, our kitchen is completely open to the dining room. So we wanted it to be less like you were coming to some fine dining restaurant and more like you were coming to a dinner party in our home. Mm-hmm. So we really wanted the guests to feel at home. So our kitchen and the dining room are completely open to each other. There's no barrier at all.
And tell me about the wait staff. Are they pretty, you know, have most of them been there from the start?
Yeah, we have many who have been there for all 4 years, and we have so many talented people coming in, and we really take the approach with everyone that, you know, we're there for teaching and mentorship. And, you know, the legacy that we want to leave is really training the next generation of thoughtful leaders in our industry. So, you know, we like to have a lot of staff, both local, those who grew up in Sonoma County and really know what it's all about, and those coming from the outside who are really here to learn about where we are in the world and what it is specifically that we do at Single Thread.
And finally, briefly, I know that Single Thread is sort of well known for wine and food pairing that is outside the box. For example, one of your dishes today is going to be that sort of tomato salad with Chardonnay, which is maybe a little counterintuitive, and we'll get more into that. But tell us about your philosophy about pairing wine and food.
Yeah, I mean, I think we never do a dish and then say, okay, and now what wine are we going to pair for it? Mm-hmm. And generally too, you know, sometimes we'll say there's a specific wine and we'll build a dish for it, but it's a conversation that we're having with the culinary team and the sommelier team, is constantly making sure that not only are the individual dishes a really great pairing, but the sort of arc of the narrative of the whole experience, you know, all that really makes sense and is progressive, that you're building towards something, that there's peaks and valleys. And you think about, like, you know, a movie plot or a novel or a symphony where you have these different acts and things. And that's what we try to do throughout the menu, that the menu is really a narrative, and that, you know, our philosophy is that we shouldn't be looking at just one dish on its own and one wine on its own, but how all of them become greater than the sum of their parts, I guess.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Chef. That was a pleasure. We'll be back with you a little bit later.
Thanks.
And now I think we will move on. So we are now going to be chatting with Park Hafner, second generation winemaker, and Kate Hafner, third generation, who is with sales and marketing. And if you're drinking with us, they'll be tasting the 2015 Chardonnay and the 2017 Chardonnay, both reserves. In 1967, Dick Hafner bought 100 acres of prunes, pears, and Zinfandel, even though a mere 4 months earlier, he'd never even been in Alexander Valley. He and his family had embarked on a multi-generational mission that now includes a whole bunch of Hafners. The winery went through the usual growing pains that small family wineries experience: bad weather, bugs, grape prices that could go up and go down, paying the bills, and the mysteries of marketing. The first commercial release was 1982, made by Park, who was still a winemaker. Park had studied at UC Davis and in Burgundy and in Napa Valley. Kate, his daughter, is on the sales and marketing side. The winery now owns 100 acres of prime vineyard land growing Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Verdot, Chardonnay, and some Malbec. The property is very close to Robert Young. Indeed, the Hafner and Young families have a long, authentic history of working together, as we'll hear more about shortly. In 1994, the Hafners installed wine caves in the hills next to the winery with a constant temperature of 63 degrees and relative humidity of 85%. The caves provide perfect aging conditions. 95% of all the Hafner wines are sold direct to consumers and to select restaurants. So let's start with Dick, and tell me, what had you been doing before you bought the ranch in 1967?
Well, we were living in Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
I was in grammar school, and my dad worked at UC Berkeley in public relations, public affairs.
Oh.
And part of his earlier life had been in an agricultural setting, and he had this idyllic view of agriculture, which is very easy to have from afar. And he thought it would be fun to own a vineyard and ultimately a winery. So in 1967, my parents bought this property, which is about 250 acres, 100 of which is under cultivation. And it's really a pleasure to be here today to talk with the Young family, because we have a long, as you mentioned, relationship. When mom and dad bought the property, obviously living in Berkeley, we didn't have any connections to the area. And of course, Robert Young, being the way that he was, stepped right in and started giving advice to dad when dad reached out to him. He was a gentleman in every respect, and you know, it's a relationship that continues to this day, because I call Jim from time to time when I have vineyard questions, because he is really the go-to guy in this area for a lot of those questions. So it's really a pleasure to be partnering with them today on this Zoom presentation. Just a quick aside, that photograph you're looking at there is looking right at the hill where my parents' house is and the winery stands today. So the scene has not changed much, although the vineyard workers don't look exactly like that anymore, nor are there any horses working in our vineyard. But,
so would Red Winery Road be running right at the base of the hills there?
I am thinking that maybe the photographer was standing on Red Winery Road, if it existed back then, because that's sort of the correct perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
Yes.
Quite a blast from the past, isn't that something?
Yeah, it's a great photograph.
And tell me, so what was behind the decision to plant Cabernet? Cabernet and Chardonnay.
Well, actually, when in the years before we built the winery, we grew Cabernets, Zinfandel, Chardonnay, White Riesling, Gewürztraminer, and we even dabbled in Pinot Noir for a little bit.
Just wanted to find out what would stick to the wall, huh?
Yeah, you know, but ultimately we ended up settling mainly on Chardonnay and Cabernet when we built the winery, because those are the two wines we felt were the best for the area and that we wanted to focus on most closely.
And so tell me today, what is production at Hafner Vineyard, and how is it divided among the different wines?
We make about 12 to 15,000 cases annually. Maybe half of that is between our two Chardonnays, our main Chardonnay and our reserve Chardonnay. And then the other half is made up of Rosé of Malbec,
Okay.
Cabernet, and then a Malbec-based blend. So we have 5 different wines that we bottle.
And one thing that we were talking about this before we went live, is the way that the slope of the land goes up Black Mountain from Red Winery Road. You tend to grow the whites lower down the slope and the reds higher up. Is that correct?
Generally speaking, although our vineyard is located right next to a creek that for thousands of years used to meander through. So we tend to plant our red varieties in that rocky, well-drained soil, and then also up against the hill. And the Chardonnay tends to be at the lowest areas on the property.
Right, and we'll talk more about this when we get to your neighbor and friend, Robert Young. Kate, let's bring you in to this too. So you kind of grew up in the winery, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And let's see, I think, so yeah, I grew up in the winery. I think.
I mean, I read on the, I read on the Hefner blog that from your crib as a baby, you could see into the cellar. Give me some memories from that time.
Yeah, I guess.
Oh, hi. I'm so sorry, you guys. Steve, we're just a little off of the slideshow, so we just want to make sure that we are on the Robert Young portion of this.
Yeah, do you want to jump to Jim Young to share some of the details about growing, and then come back and I'll be thinking about that question, what we did when we were young.
Great questions. Thanks so much, Steve. Thank you.
Well, let me run through the intro. The Young family has long, deep roots in Alexander Valley. Peter Young arrived from New York in 1852, his eyes filled with gold rush dreams. He purchased his ranch on the lower slopes of Black Mountain in 1858. The family soon became involved in many local community services. For 100 years or so, the ranch grew prunes. It wasn't until 1963, and I love this story, that the family took the very experimental step of planting Cabernet Sauvignon, because it ripened after the prune harvest, and they thought it would bring in a little extra income in those days when wine looked like it was going to be a pretty good thing to get into. They also propagated the very famous Robert Young Chardonnay clone. In fact, Robert Young's Chardonnay was the first trellised vine of any variety in Alexander Valley, and Chateau St. Jean's bottling of a Robert Young Vineyard Chardonnay in 1975 was the first vineyard designated Chardonnay anywhere in California. In 1997, after kind of getting tired of watching other wineries get famous using their grapes, Fred Young formally started the estate winery. Today, the 5th generation is already hard at work keeping the tradition going. The Youngs, I think it's fair to say, have become famous as viticulturists. They have analyzed every square inch of their property so as to plant the right clones and varieties in the right soils. So let's start with Jim Young, and again, nice to see you, Jim. It's been a while.
Hi, Steve.
Give us an overview of Alexander Valley climate and soils and what makes it so special for premium grape growing.
All right, Steve. Well, you're looking at this photograph right here. Well,
we were.
Let's go back one sec. Can we go back one?
There we go.
There we are. Yeah. So the little house in the picture there in the middle is kind of where the old original homestead was, and then my mom and dad rebuilt and built this nice house there in 1983. And we're looking at basically northwest direction from, looks like a drone picture over above the vineyards here. On the right hand side, you can see some of those rolling hills we've been talking about earlier here where the Cabernets and Reds are grown. That's where we grow ours, is on the hillsides here. And then on the valley floor there on the left, that's where we have mostly whites, some reds like Park said up against the hillsides, similar situation where the soils are a little shallower and it can control the vigor of the Cabernet Sauvignon. I think we can go ahead and switch to the next slide now. There we are. So this is a map of Sonoma County, and you can see RYEV Hafner up there on the center of the upper side of that. We're kind of the more northeasterly section of Sonoma County, one of the warmer growing areas, influenced heavily by the ocean. You can see those big blue arrows pushing the cool air in. Last night I was out harvesting with a grape harvester and for some other wineries, and it was 47 degrees outside and it was cold and you had to have 3 jackets on. So it can be cold, and you can see the Russian River flows right through the middle of that Alexander Valley area, and that's what's kind of carved out and created all that alluvial soil, which is where we're growing the Chardonnays. It's that deep, rich soil that helps protect the Chardonnay vine through the hot spells that we get sometimes in summertime. Even though it may be cool at night, it can get up, pretty warm in the daytime. But that soil reserve of moisture helps those vines through that and protects the delicate grapes from sunburn and so on. And then, of course, the Cabernet is king, and that's more, for us anyway, grown on the hillsides. And you need to kind of slow the Cabernet down a little bit because it's a little bit more vigorous.
Okay, are you there, Robbie?
Yeah, I'm here.
Good, I can hear you. So you're 5th generation, and tell us again what you do in the company, in the winery.
So I am the lead in hospitality at the Scion House. I actually right here, this slide I was referring to. But yeah, I've been working here my entire life, ever since I was 13, 14, working out in the field, helping Jim drive tractor, prune, pick grapes, all that whatnot. But the tasting room you're looking at, we opened up November 2018, which sits right on top of our hill overlooking our whole property.
Beautiful.
And, yeah, it has some of the prettiest views, around 360-degree views. Every wine we make, we can point to the vineyard where it comes from, which is, I think, a handful of places in the world can offer that. But I'm fortunate enough to be able to work here now, and I get to cater to all the guests, so they get to meet me personally, which is amazing. Just help build that connection. But Rachel Taylor here, I want to mention as well. She's 6th generation of the family. She's Matt's, our winemaker, is right-hand woman, if you will, the cellar master. But she is being trained by him to be the winemaker someday. And I'm looking to get more into the business role, run the winery someday. But we're both, committed to the family business and hoping to carry it on for another 160 years.
That is fantastic. 6th generation. And are there any 7th generation little kids?
Yeah, Rachel, she just had a little girl maybe 6 months ago now. That's one of 3 or 4. But his family's getting bigger and bigger by the day, for sure.
Well, good for you. It's great to have such a multi-generational family. Tell us what is involved in hospitality now that, I don't know, how's it going with the pandemic? Is the tasting room open?
Yeah, we've been open for a couple months now. We thankfully, now that we're at this new venue, we have a ton of outdoor seating. So everybody can be socially distanced, and we can still cater to our guests. And because of that, having that outdoor seating, we've been actually fairly busy, which is a blessing.
That's wonderful. And hopefully we'll be able to gather indoors soon, because let's hope the rainy season is coming one of these days.
All right.
Right. And I also want to bring Matt Michael in. Matt, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the wines. You want to talk about 2016, 2018 Chardonnay?
Yeah, I think we can start just with our general selection. I mean, we're known for Alexander Valley Chardonnay.
Okay.
That's the bread and butter. Has been the mainstay for Robert Young, and that's what people come up here for. I would say it's a rich tropical style. So we do a Surly's age on it. So we age it for 18 months in barrel. And so what you get is a real viscosity in the palate, a real richness. We don't particularly pick it very ripe. It's 23 to 24 and a half bricks. So you'll see some people that make Chardonnay up in this area will pick it even riper. What we want to kind of hover in the middle. What we want to do is offer a range of flavors across the Alexander Valley selection. But we also want to give kind of that freshness and that richness that comes from offering a range. So if you pick everything really ripe, you get a one-dimensional flavor profile. So we really want to kind of offer the best of the property and the best of the vineyard sites here. So we pick across a range. And we also have a Clone 17 Chardonnay, which, as you mentioned before, was the Clone 17 Robert Young. And that's really emphasizing our particular clone. And so what we try to do on that is rein back on the new oak on that and really showcase the fruit itself and how it transfers into a wine. And then last but not least is our barrel select Chardonnay. So we have 3 distinctive Chardonnays. The barrel select is more of an old school throwback where we emphasize the richness and the viscosity of the Chardonnay.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say that I tasted some of your wines recently, and in my judgment anyway, the older Chardonnays, to my taste, were actually more pleasing because I thought that all the elements, including the oak, had integrated better. So what is your thought on aging good Alexander Valley Chardonnay?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I started working here, we did a 10-year vertical with the previous winemaker, Kevin Warren, and we entered into it, and I was like, this is going to be weird, 10 years on Chardonnay. And we tasted blind the entire portfolio, and it was amazing how well 10-year-old Chardonnays held up. It's a combination of the site, our clone, the way we ferment, but I would agree with you. Up front, these wines aren't fully integrated, even though they're beautiful and they're drinking well. You have to wait 3, 4, 5 years out, sometimes 6 years before they really hit. And usually by that time we're sold out. But it's something that builds, and it's really speaks to this area in Chardonnay. Yeah. As Jim mentioned, he was picking Chardonnay. It was 47 degrees in the morning. It could have been 100 degrees that day. So you get this diurnal temperature swing that really pops things up. But then you get that cooling at night that retains that acidity. And that combination really allows a Chardonnay to flourish here.
Mm-hmm. And tell me how people can find Robert Young Chardonnays. Are you in the 3-tiered system, or off-premise, on-premise, wine club?
We are, locally you can find us in select restaurants. We're almost exclusively a direct-to-consumer brand. So we're a very small family-run operation.
What total production for the whole winery and for the Chardonnays?
Per annum is 6,000 cases. So we're a small brand, yeah. So really the emphasis is not on volume, but quality. And so could we grow more? Probably, but that's not our focus. Our focus is trying to put the best product out there every year.
Right. Well, I think that it's time for us to return to Chef Kyle.
I'm sorry, we got a little off track there, and so I just want to say thank you to the Robert Young team for your presentation. I know, Kate, I'm sorry I interrupted you. There was a really wonderful question directed at you, and I think that there are some items that you would like to touch on as well. So let's just bring it back to the Hafners for a minute, if that works for everyone.
Okay, I lost your audio for a while, so sorry.
We're going to go ahead and bring it back to the Hafners, where the current slide that we're on, and then we're going to bring it back to the chef, if that works for everyone. Also, we have a really quick question. Where were the grapes from each vintage? Were they from the same vineyard, and were they created the same way? And I would say, Matt, that question is for you, if you could quickly answer.
Sorry, I muted my microphone. Yeah, so we essentially pick across a range of vineyard blocks here, and I'll answer very quickly. We have about 6 or 7 different blocks. Most of them are the Robert Young clone. We do have a couple other clones on property, and the idea is to source from different blocks, different areas, and different clones to create an overall complexity. So the blocks don't change per year. How they make it into the blend sometimes changes per year.
And of course, vintages change also.
They do. So that plays a part in it as well. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. And I'll let you take it away, Steve, and we'll head back to Hafner here.
Back to Hafner. So we have Park and Kate, you both still there?
Yeah.
We are.
Sorry.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Where do we want to go? Where's the slide going now? You want to talk about the, oh,
Yeah.
there they are. There's some beautiful Hafners.
Okay. So just to give you a quickie about our business, as I mentioned, it's 250 acres, 100 of which is planted. Started in 1967. We built the winery in 82. We sell about 95% of our production direct to people on our mailing list and about 5% direct to restaurants. We have never used the three-tiered system from day one. This is a photograph in front of you of our team. In front on the bottom row, the oldest gentleman, that would be my father, Dick Hafner, the founder. My mom is no longer with us. On his right is myself, and on his left is my brother. Is Kate, who works with Scott, and then her daughter, the 4th generation, not actively involved in the business quite yet, Marie. And behind my dad is my wife, Sarah, who is kind of the co-winemaker with me. Sustainability is sort of a theme that runs through our business, from being good stewards of the land to taking care of our employees, our patrons, and the business itself. And we don't really have much turnover on the team as a result of that. And there were quite a few gray hairs in the last picture, because many of our vineyard guys have been with us for 25 or 30 years. And in fact, our assistant winemaker's father worked in the vineyard for about 35 years and has since retired, but Ricardo has been with us for over 10 years now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, you know, we wanted to share just a little snapshot of sort of life here. As Dad said, we're really focused on sustainability, and it's not just in the vineyard and the winery, which we're certified in both, but it's the business and the team and the patrons and the community. And, you know, it can be anything from like the free EV charging when you come to visit, and I know Robert Young does the same thing, or, you know, health insurance and 401k accounts for everyone in the vineyard and in the winery. Or we planted a small garden in a fallow block that the vegetables that are produced are picked by Farm to Pantry, which is a local organization that delivers that produce to nonprofits that then deliver it to those in need. And they also single thread. So some of this produce from here may end up in the single thread kitchen. But ultimately, you know, Steve, your question about like, what do I remember? It's always been part of our family business, just like Robbie said. I mean, I think the generations are just, we're part of it, and, you know, rollerblading in the caves or helping out on the crush pad. And it's fun to see my daughter continue that, because really we're trying to preserve the land here and the business for future generations to come.
Thanks. We have another question that just came in, and I think I know the answer. Are we going to taste these wines in real time? And I think the answer is no, because we're going to get back to Chef Kyle, and we may reference the wines, but we're not going to go through formal.
We'll certainly taste a couple of ours, and we can kind of skip forward. We just wanted to give a couple snapshots. We do have the wines to pour, so maybe we can, I just wanted to say these are the 5 wines, and like Dad said, we sell 95% direct, but maybe you could skip forward and Dad will talk about how we make the reserve and let's taste it at the same time.
I think that's a great plan, Kate. I think that sounds awesome to share those wines, and maybe it's a conversation that you all have together with Robert Young, if you'd like to do that.
Yeah, so you want to speak briefly?
Yeah, let me just give you a quick rundown on the wines, but start by telling you that our underlying winemaking philosophy is to make wines that we feel go well with food and that age well. So the focus is not so much on richness and power, but more on balance and elegance and finesse. So we tend to pick our fruit, maybe similar to the Youngs, a little bit sooner than other people do. So lower sugar, which leads to lower alcohol and slightly higher acidity, all of which lend the wines to ageability and food compatibility. The reserve program was inspired, as you'll read there on the slide, by the time I worked in Meursault, Burgundy in the year before we built the winery. And all of the juice for the reserve Chardonnay is barrel fermented. At the end of alcoholic fermentation, all of those barrels are inoculated for malolactic fermentation, which is a fermentation that converts the grape's natural malic acid to lactic acid and adds kind of a wine. And then we age the wine for about 15 months in barrels. And you age in barrels for two reasons. The most obvious reason is to flavor the wine with the flavor of the oak. And we feel that a barrel imparts that type of flavor for about 2 or 3 years and then becomes what we refer to as a neutral barrel. But the other reason for aging in barrels is to get development in the wine in a way that does not occur if you're aging in tanks. Because when you age in barrels, there is a constant, albeit very slow, evaporation of wine through the wood. Every 2 weeks we come back, we pull the bungs, and we top the barrels back up with wine. The action of pouring wine into the barrels incorporates a little bit of oxygen every time you do that, and it's that gradual addition of oxygen that allows the wine to develop. So we extend the barrel aging on the reserve Chardonnay to 15 months, not to get more oak flavor in the wine, but to get more development in the wine before the wine goes into the bottle. So in fact, for the reserve Chardonnay program, only about 10% are new barrels. The rest are a blend of 1 to 5-year-old barrels. If you have the two wines in front of you, I might just give you a couple of quick comments about the wines. The 2017 is the wine that we released this year. It's held in the bottle about 14 months after bottling. We usually describe the varietal character as kind of grapefruit or citrus-like, maybe pears. And when we do a vertical tasting like Matt mentioned, which we do annually, we're always struck by the continuity of flavor from year to year. But in the younger wine, the varietal character tends to be a little more vibrant, a little bit stronger character. And then with aging, it tends to recede a little bit, and you notice more of the minerally, flinty type notes that come from extended barrel aging, malolactic fermentation, and barrel fermentation.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what you'd find sort of in the 2015, you know, if you're
Right.
tasting them side by side, it might have sort of softened a bit the older one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as you said, Park, on your blog, it's all personal preference.
Absolutely.
If you like your Chardonnays or Cabernet or anything else for that matter, young or with some bottle age, I think the mark of a great wine is that it can be wonderful when it's young and when it's a little bit older. My feeling is we're kind of running out of time and we need to get back to Chef.
Yep.
Yes, and there we are. Wow, those are good enough to eat. Chef, what are we looking at?
On the menus that we're working on currently, some summer favorites. And I chose these dishes for these two particular wines, which, by the way, I love so much. I'm such a huge fan of both of these winemakers. I love their Chardonnays. I love to see the expression of the terroir from Alexander Valley and the Chardonnay, and it's always, so fun for us here in Sonoma County to see the different expression of the terroir of our very, very biodiverse county, and see what that expression is. And this inland, talking a lot about the heat shifts and the highs and the sort of lows and the temperatures, and I love to see what that yields in these Chardonnay. So I think everyone is really familiar with the very traditional Chardonnay pairing. I think what goes well with Chardonnay, and the classic chicken, poultry, salmon, these kinds of things, and we all know that those are fantastic. And by the way, I think some of those classic pairings are going to be fantastic with these particular wines. And I think, as Park said, they make these these wines for to go with food, and I think that's a constant thing that we hear in our region is that that these wines were specifically made with food in mind. And of course you can enjoy them on their own, but it's our great pleasure in the restaurant and as a chef to really design our menus around these wines. So these two dishes that you're looking at, maybe a little bit less traditional than what you'd think of as Chardonnay pairings, but we've done it, and with these wines, and we just think it's absolutely fantastic. So the first dish is all different tomatoes from my wife's farm. So my wife grows 30 different varieties of tomatoes and over 300 tomato plants. So this is kind of a collection of all the different tomatoes that are in season at the moment, and we do have some fresh and raw, but also some that are smoked, some that are slightly dried, some that are poached and concentrated. And we like to get all of the different flavors, a lot like we're talking about the flavor profiles in these wines. We're doing flavor profiles on these tomatoes along with our cucumbers, but really kind of the tomatoes are the star of the dish here, but what's giving it a bit of the richness and sort of the umami here of why I think this is a great Chardonnay pairing with these particular wines is a fish, a raw fish called kampachi. It's a Japanese fish. We serve that raw. We very, very lightly cure it, both with some green coriander from our farm and salt. And that's really it. And it's just that sliced fish with all this collection of tomatoes. We have some herbs in there, basil, shiso, chervil in there. And it's kind of a combination of the umami, both that comes from the tomatoes, because tomatoes are very high in glutamates, and the umami with the seasoning of the fish, but with that freshness of the summertime and an underlying richness, which makes it a really great pair with the Chardonnay. So you're still getting those classic rich flavors that you associate with the pairing, just in a really fresh, clean, and summery sort of expression. And then the other dish is a dish of Salanova lettuces. It's a whole head of Salanova lettuce. So my wife grows one head of lettuce for every single guest. Wow. We take that apart and sort of reassemble it. Underneath is a bavois, which is kind of like almost like a savory panna cotta. It's made with chive and creme fraiche. So you get a bit of the acidity and the richness from the creme fraiche. Again, this is kind of like the theme on the pairing of this is like you are getting that sort of like lactic richness from the creme fraiche. We have some marinated underneath there local wild salmon. And then we have the lettuces dressed with a sort of Meyer lemon jelly. And then we make a soil, so because it looks like that it's growing right out of the ground, and that's a soil made from chicory, from black sesame as well, and then a little bit of lightly smoked roe of the salmon as well, spoon over there again. Some of those bursts, some of those pops. Again, another one of those themes is like the umami of that and the sort of the underlying richness. So, we've had a lot of fun with these dishes and, pairing them with the Chardonnays and kind of an unexpected, thing. I think maybe a guest thinks that they'll see Chardonnay a little bit later on in the menu. So it's fun to hit them with the Chardonnay pairings a little bit earlier on.
Yeah. We are running out of time, but Chef, I'm curious, what is involved in coming up with these dishes? For example, how long does it take from concept to when it's really done?
We like to spend a lot of time in development and have a lot of conversations between the farm team and the culinary team and the sommelier team So there's quite a bit of communication that goes into all those dishes to align, because we have not just the restaurant to run, but the farm and the produce, to run into that. So we harvest every day, and that produce that we harvest gets served that night. So it's quite a bit of coordination. So, generally speaking, it's a long conversation leading up because we know what to anticipate is coming. And then ultimately we kind of also live in the moment. So it's a lot of planning and also a lot of kind of doing it by the seat of your pants at the same time. So we give room for creativity, and we give, room to live in the moment also.
Well, they look absolutely extraordinary, and I wish somebody would invent some app where we could actually taste them through the computer, but that hasn't happened yet.
They are very beautiful. And actually, we have one question for you really quick. We might run a few minutes over if everyone's okay, but Chef, I have a question. Somebody's asking if those are basil flowers that we are looking at.
Basil flowers, sorry, on the
I think on the dish on the left is maybe what they're referring to.
On the dish on the left, no, a little bit of basil. It's a shiso buds. Yeah, which is kind of in the same family. It's a Japanese perilla, so it has similar, taste profiles to the purple basil as well. But shiso.
We have another question. I'm going to throw this over to Matt and Michael. What is the optimal temperature for storing Chardonnay? And I'm assuming he means aging it, not putting it in the fridge for dinner tonight.
Sure. Yeah, I would say anywhere from 57 to 60 degrees is perfect.
Okay.
Serving temperature wise, we have a little richer Chardonnay, so you're probably going to want to pop the temperature up to closer to 60 degrees to serve it. As the Chardonnays are less rich and more light body, then you kind of want to dip them down a little bit more in temperature.
And another question from Anne Hudak. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this is for Matt too. The 16 is delicious. Will the 18 age similarly? It feels like it's drinking young. If we hold on to this, would we expect it to develop similarly?
Yes, we would. As we mentioned before, our Chardonnays pick up steam as they age. So not saying that they're not good out of the gate, but as you've noticed, some of those intricacies and some of the texture and the flavor profiles really build with that bottle aging. I think it's also a vintage thing. No two vintages are the same. So you just get different nuances and vintages that you just can't quantify as a singular taste. So I think what you're seeing here is really the 18 vintage. You're seeing the 16 vintage with the 16. And so you're going to get these little nuances and these little flavor and aroma differences. But I think overall, if you held on to it, yes, it would drink more complex and similar to the 16 if you waited.
Is it fair to say that vintages, or let me put it this way, that vintage differences are becoming less with modern techniques of winemaking and vine protection and growing and all that kind of stuff? I mean, we used to think that, some vintages are horrible and some vintages are fantastic. What's your take on that, Mike, Matt, but anyone else can weigh in on that too?
I think there's a lot of technology that's come about in winemaking to help kind of narrow that gap with vintages, but the vintages still are a very real thing. And I think we don't want to commoditize our products, so we want to show the estate and the vintage differences because I think it really speaks to the annual product. I mean, we're harvesting a crop once a year, and we're making a product from that once a year. And it really takes you on that growing season and that whole expedition through the process of it. And you're really seeing the transparency of the vintage when you bottle that wine. So if you get in and start manipulating the wine to try and make it taste like last year's, then you're taking away from that season and everything it had to offer and the transparency of the vineyard and the season, if that makes sense.
So Matt, in that vein, we would actually, I'm getting a lot of requests over here. So I would like to, for our viewers, take a little step back. I know we kind of missed it, but take a step back. would you please take a moment to walk us through the two Chardonnays that we have up on the screen, because we're getting a large number of requests from audience members that have both of these wines in front of them and really want to hear about these wines. You don't have to take too long, but just a couple minutes if you're willing to do that. I know that people would really appreciate that.
Sure, of course. So these are, both of them are Alexander Valley Chardonnay. Ones are 2016. The other ones are 2018. So what you're seeing is a 2 vintage difference in the wine. So next to the 16 to 18 will seem young. It'll seem a little underdeveloped when you compare them side by side. But what you see in the 16 is, 16 to me was a little bit of a riper vintage. So you get more of that pushed out tropical fruit note with the peach, more of that stone fruit character, a lot of butterscotch and caramel in there. But you get a richness and a suppleness, but it's weaved with that acidity through. So it's kind of this full palate thing going on. It just really has hit that point right now where everything is hitting, I think, in the wine. With the 18 right now, I get a lot of pineapple, vanilla bean. It's not quite as ripe a vintage as 16 was, so you're getting a little bit more of those undertone notes. I would say like green apple, maybe a little yellow apple, pear in there. It's got nice acidity, a nice core to it, nice richness, maybe a little bit more on the butter notes. But overall, I think the 18 is exactly where the 16 was when we released it. It just hasn't quite developed. And this is really kind of a fun thing for people when they taste side by side, because what you're really seeing is what bottle bouquet and bottle aging does to the wine. It kind of takes everything, you know, I think of wines when we bottle them as being a little pokey. Different things are sticking out, and then you put them in the bottle and you age them for a year or two, and they kind of all coalesce together. And that's what you really get when you lay a wine down and you let it properly bottle age. Kind of some of those things that stick out in the beginning, they kind of all come together, and you get this seamlessness and this nuance in the wine. So in my take on these wines and these vintages, they are different. It's very consistent with the style. I think what you're seeing is just subtleties in the vintage differences and subtleties in, you know, how those grapes were grown and transferred to the winemaking process. But overall, if you held on to this 18 for a couple of years, I think you'll see the similar things that you're seeing in the 16 right now.
Real good. Anyone else want to weigh in on any of the individual wines?
Yeah, if any audience members have questions, we are here to answer those questions, and we really are so happy for everyone today.
Okay, any more questions from the audience? I'm not seeing anything. Well, I guess that what we can do now is I should remind you that there is one more episode left in the seminar series. Next week, it's going to be Merlot. So tune into that. Hey, we have a final question. Please ask Hafner to talk about their wines. Well, we did a little bit, but Art, hey, you want to talk about the two wines, the two reserves?
Sure. So
No, I mean, I think we spoke a little bit about them, but maybe if you compare, you know, the 17 to the 15, I think it's, if you have all four of the wines, it's kind of a, you know, ours and Robert Young's, they're really an interesting contrast. So just on the heels of Matt Michael's comments, what's different or what stands out for you?
Yeah, I think our 2017, which is our current release, not unlike Robert Young, is will benefit from some additional bottle age. Young, as I mentioned, citrus, grapefruit aromas, but it already has a little bit of the creaminess from the malolactic fermentation. But we find that our wine, well, personally, I like our Chardonnays a year or two after they are released because they just tend to soften, they develop a little bit more complexity. And as I tell people when they visit to trust their own taste, I prefer our wines a little bit older, but there are a lot of people that prefer them younger. And, you know, that's the most important thing, is to know your palate and trust your palate. Don't listen to an expert to tell you when you drink the wine. If you think it's great now, drink it now.
Maybe it might be fun if we could very briefly, instead of talking about the differences between Hafner Robert Young, what are the similarities that we can ascribe to, let's say, an Alexander Valley or Black Mountain Chardonnay terroir? And for me, I'll just throw bold fruit out there.
Yeah, well, I think that depends upon how ripe you pick it. It sounds like, just like Robert Young, tend to pick it at a slightly lower ripeness, lower richness, just because we think that makes a wine that pairs better with food, and that's kind of the way we enjoy wine. And so selfishly, we tend to make the wines we like to enjoy best. You know, I think there's all sorts of different styles that you can find in Alexander Valley, depending upon what the winemaker's going for. And as Jim alluded, you know, there's quite a variety of soils and microclimates, especially as you get closer to the river, that will give you differences in flavor and flavor profiles.
We have a couple more questions that have filtered in. Real quickly, the fires. Obviously, people are very curious about that. Are you seeing any impact from the smoke?
Well, we had picked all of our Chardonnay before the fire started. I think that, and we are getting ready to start picking red grapes. I think we've been very lucky this year in that we didn't seem to get a lot of fresh smoke, which is what they feel impacts the fruit the most. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of high smoke. I don't know about Jim and the crew over there, but we did a little, what's called a micro ferment in a 5-gallon bucket and sent it in to be tested. So we'll see if there's an impact. Personally, I don't think there's going to be an impact from this year, just because the fires were far enough away from us, and really the wind wasn't blowing fresh smoke into our vineyard. What do you think, Jim?
Well, I know that Matt pulled samples before we picked any of the Chardonnays, and I think we got all negative results on all those tests. That was good. And some people now have done ferments and so on, but it's taking so long to get the analytical results back. But from what I'm hearing from some of the neighbors is that they're getting low results right now on some of the reds that have come back from micro ferments, but they're borderline or right at the 0 point or thereabouts. So hopefully we're in good shape still, and hopefully we don't have any more fires.
Yeah, right.
Did anyone else want to weigh in on that?
But I echo the same comments. I mean, we did micro ferments as well. To speak to his point, I think, you know, the immediate danger is when you're close to the fire. That's where the volatile phenols, that smoky character, gets deposited in grapes, the leaves and everything. We seem to be far enough away that we're not taking the brunt of that. When you get over Dry Creek and Russian River and some of those areas that were a little bit closer to the fire, they seem to have a little bit more impact. So as far as I can see right now, as well as the Hafners, we seem to be kind of okay, I think. So fingers crossed.
So
right?
we had a question about a reader or a listener wanted to know more about food pairings with the two Chardonnays. And it strikes me that unfortunately we can't all enjoy Chef Kyle's food all the time as much as we might want to. So just a few of you from Hafner and Robert Young, what do you like to drink your own Chardonnays with?
Well, I'm a kind of traditionalist. I love it with roast chicken, which we have quite a bit. We do it in our wood burning oven, which is the ultimate way to roast a chicken as far as I'm concerned. We love it with, you know, salmon.
Or just hors d'oeuvres, you know, smoked trout and padron peppers out on the terrace, right? I mean, what about you guys at Robert Young?
I think our Chardonnay is a little bit more on the richer side. So I think, you know, if you think about maybe some sort of pasta, primavera, some creme fraiche in there, or something that kind of gives a little viscosity to it. It really goes nicely with the Chardonnay. Think about any sort of whitefish on the grill, maybe like a tilapia or something like that. Something that has a little bit of that buttery creaminess texture to it. And, you know, at the end of the day, a great cheese plate, it really goes well with this Chardonnay.
And I want to hear from Robbie Young. What do you like to eat with your Chardonnays?
Definitely as an appetizer, I like brie. Brie and crackers, I think that goes really well, especially with our Chardonnay. And kind of what Park was saying with chicken, I eat a lot of chicken, so I definitely enjoy that with our Chardonnay.
I think we're moving toward the dinner hour, aren't we? And there's a final question that I see: is the young Chardonnay available anywhere in LA?
No, so we're 100% for the most part direct to consumer. As Matt said earlier, we just are in a handful of restaurants really locally. So the only way to get it if you're in LA would be to give us a call and we can ship it to you, or go on our website.
Well, there you go. And I guess, are we going to post contact information for the wineries, or?
Yes, so we certainly will do that. And we really would just like to thank everyone for joining today. And we would like to let you know, if you want to learn more about these fabulous wines, these wines, again, are direct to the consumer. They are small family vineyards. And so you really are supporting these awesome wineries, and you will be getting an email with direct links. There are additionally some discounts available for those that were participating today. Some overnight shipping details, some shipping discounts. So we will share all of that via email, but we really thank everyone for tuning in today, and we hope to see you on the next episode. And most importantly, thank you so much to the Hafners and the Youngs. And before we leave, we would love for everyone to raise a glass. So thank you.
Cheers. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. It was great.
For having us.
Cheers. Thank you.